Hi, everyone. Now we just started. I'll give it another minute and wait for everyone to come, and then we'll get started here. All right, looks like we're a minute after. I'll start a little housekeeping and then we can get started here. So thank you everyone for joining today. We're really looking forward to this presentation on the TPM. Just a couple of reminders, this is being recorded and the slides and recording will be distributed to you by the end of the week for your review. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or throw it in the chat. We will get to those towards the end. And if you would like to be muted, please let me know. Please unmuted, please let me know in the chat and you can come off mute and ask your question there. But I will hand it off to the presenter and we'll get started here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eliza, and thank you for joining this meeting. Today, I'm going to be going through some of the updates for the Technology Priority Map, or the TPM, and the updates that we're making to 2025. Heads up, it's going to be a relatively short update. There weren't any major updates, just a little bit of minor changes from last year's TPM, and we're hoping to, and hopefully you can get feedback, and then we're trying to get this finished up before the end of the year. Great, let's get started. So the agenda for today is just a heads up for, or a recap for anyone who's hasn't been a part of these meetings before, like myself. I'm gonna go over a little bit of the TPM purpose, how it's organized currently, and then we'll go over some of the changes and organizational changes, as well as just the actual content updates that we've made. For example, I'll discuss how in the organization I was working with Stephen and Crystal from my team, and we essentially went through and reorganized it because it was getting, I think over the years, it's gotten really big, and we were trying to keep it as digestible as possible, which led to us simplifying and removing some of those lower value or unnecessary columns. And then the updates that we're going to go over is how we were defining prioritization for new and existing technologies, and then also going over which items from the ideation list will be in the TPM. If any of this is not something you're familiar with, just let me know. I'm happy to give more background in anything. And then I'll talk about some of the, just a few of the new technologies that we're adding in 2025. So again, the purpose of the TPM, it's the Technology Priority Map, or TPMs, are used in GET program as part of technology screening process. TPMs exist to identify high priority technology assessment needs and drive ideation for new emerging technology projects. TPM's a living document that can be revised as needed to respond to these changing technologies and changing regulatory landscape. Um, in the GET program, we update the TPM at least annually. So essentially, we look at the ideation list, which is an internal document where everyone updates any of the new projects or ideas that they want. And I'll go over how we prioritize them. And then we organize which ones need to be placed, which ones have enough background or enough content that they can be put into this year's, or if they need to be waited on, or if as some of them finish up, we change the priority of these and we just keep this living document moving as these as new technologies are put in and others are removed. Great. So some of the this is the organization, and then I'll go over the organizational changes. There's not much difference in previous years TPM organization. We typically have a category where each of these ideas fall under, whether that be appliances, commercial food service, HVAC, process loads, miscellaneous, water heating, or the whole building. The technology category is broad grouping of technology based on their primary function of purpose, and it refers to the overarching idea or field in which this technology operates. Then we go into the specific technology family, which which refers to related technologies that share common features, such as appliances, cooking appliances, dishwashing. We go into controls for the water heating, controls for the whole building, etc. And then going into subgroups, some examples of these would be the controls, condense and storage water heaters, duct sealing, boilers, catalyst, greenhouse HVAC, and then finally that specific technology's name. And all of this, these are different columns that exist in the current TPM. There are, well, and then I'll go over to the next one. So this is essentially how it's mainly organized. These are the core columns, and then we go into more of them. So one of the changes that we made was, like I said, as the document grew too complex and it started taking a little bit too long to maintain, especially as we were trying to filter in new and old ideas, we found that some of the fields that may have looked valuable in the past weren't necessarily being used for decisions, or just we didn't have the information to keep them updated accurately. So it was turning into best guesses. And so with Stephen and Crystal's help, we streamlined this. We agreed to remove several of these lower value or duplicative columns, such as product readiness, market readiness, stakeholder interest, and potential impact scoring. Because even though these may be important, these aren't something that we can constantly update for each new idea, or we don't have access to that information. And when it was turning into our best guess, it wasn't, I don't think it was moving the needle much for what we needed it for. So we basically removed, so as you can see, the top is the 2024 and past columns. And then we limited it down to these 2025 columns. And these are, majority of them, it's the same, just with a few less in there. And we combined all of the information that we removed into the comment section or the next steps, wherever it made more sense. Um, we believe that this is going to reduce editing time, and it's going to improve the clarity for anyone that's using the TPM now, and it's going to be less overwhelming to navigate through. So in terms of organization, that was one of the major changes that we decided to make. The updates from the actual for the actual TPM that we made once we made those organizational updates was we updated the ideation list, or the updated ideation list that, as I mentioned before, is this internal document, and it's updated as often as ideas come in. So we looked at the new list and we used it as a direct input into the TPM updates, which meant we had to look through the existing or the old TPM and make sure that there were no repetition of projects, since all the ideation list consists of all updates and any new ideas for a specific project. So if it just ends up being a next step for the project or an additional future decision made in the project, it doesn't need to exist as its own line in the TPM. And so we went through and added all of that updated information for each of the projects. We did end up adding some new technologies, and essentially we were going through using the ideation list for this new technologies, as well as we added technologies if it was applying to any of these, if it was linked to a past or active ET project, if it supported decarbonization, system reliability, or resilience. If we thought if it was deemed to be able to become a measure package within the next 1 to 5 years, or we had to ensure that there was public research or references that could be documented for all of these lists, since the ideation list is just ideas, and to make sure if that specific idea and technology makes it into the TPM, we were making sure it had at least some of these qualifications before adding it in. And once it did, it was easy to populate the fields existing in the TPM. Um, and we used, so the ideation list has different color-coded projects that we ended up looking at. So as people add the ideas in, if they become dark green, that's a completed ET project. Those projects do exist in the TPM. They're usually a lower priority unless there's ongoing relevance to that project. The active or in progress ET projects is the light green section, and these were ensured to be included in the TPM with a high priority. And if they were just updates to pre-existing projects, we made sure to change the priority of that specific project and all these updates. The yellow ideas were strong candidate ideas. If we thought that if we had budget and funding, we would be including it into the 2025. And so if it was a technology focused project, it was added in usually at a medium or high priority. And then we also went through the early concepts and rejected options, which were typically red and white in the aviation list. And those were not included in the TPM since they they weren't, they were either rejected or they weren't ready to be on the list yet. Lastly, some of the new technologies that we added in for 2025. Crystal and Stephen can speak more to any of these if anyone has specific questions, but some of the big ones, like I mentioned, the largest addition or one of the larger additions that we made was the gas absorption heat pump lab and field testing work, which initially was just lab testing and now it includes field testing um, for multiple units. And then we also looked at hydrogen ultra low NOx burners. We added that in as a high priority combustion technology since it's due to its support in decarbonization and reducing emissions. We looked at smart steam traps, GHP, pool heating applications, and finally, we looked at sizing and technical tools, especially for the TSB tool and pool dehumidification tool that we have. So these are just some examples of some of the newer technology that was added, but it didn't, these are existing categories, or a lot of these are just additions to previous projects. So for the most part, there wasn't too many updates to provide here. Um, I'm going to open the floor to any questions that anyone might have.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And this is probably more for Stephen or Ava. When do we think the new TPM will be published on our website?
We would usually publish it sort of at the end of the year, beginning of the year.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So from those of you in the audience, is there any question about, the types of measures that we have in here? Or if you've got any questions about the role of the TPM relative to the GET program, or maybe even in a broader sense? Any questions about the ones that Liza had indicated as being prioritize, or which ones, we prioritize in general? We are next month going to go through our research plan, which is maybe a higher level than this, which probably is maybe easier to go through than this, which is a fairly long and involved spreadsheet. But just curious if anyone's got any questions about the types of things that we are looking at as far as the gas emerging technologies program.
Okay, great. I don't think there are any questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so as Stephen said, we will also be going over the annual research plan, which is a document also updating all of the new technologies and ideas that we're adding in, and a lot less, I guess, involved or intricate as the TPM document is. So that one will be easier to hopefully present on and share. And if nobody has any questions here, hopefully we can, yeah, that's all I have.
Oh, we do have a question.
Oh.
Let's see, Michael asked, do you foresee any of these new technologies becoming developed as deemed measures, or are they all expected to be custom measures if incentivized? I can take that if you'd like.
Please.
Yeah, I think it depends upon the measures, but certainly some of these, the intent long term is that we'd have enough data out there to make them into measure packages and thus being able to offer them as deemed measures. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate you all attending, and yeah, next month, tune in for the research plan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.